I think round of applause for everyone here for attending, first and foremost. Round of applause for those who put this amazing conference together. Round of applause for the trades folks that we have outside for that are displaying all their wares. It's well put together. It's a lot of fun. And from the OGCA standpoint, for those who don't know, Ontario General Contractors Association, we're a huge proponent of innovations. We're a huge proponent of BIM and moving things to the next level and really getting the smaller contractors on the same page as some of the larger ones that are out there. And forums like this really allow us to do this kind of thing. And so it's great to be able to rub shoulders with all of you and to talk about things. And this will then turn us on to the topic at hand. The topic that we're going to talk about is the future of construction and whatnot, but specifically addressing labor shortages in the face of growing demands on infrastructure. And I want to start off by saying that Ontario, it's not unique in this. I just got back from a trip overseas in Europe, and it's very similar. They can't find anyone for pretty much every market that they have there. And it's problematic because if you don't have the people in order to do the work, you can't get the work done, and then costs escalate and whatnot. And we have that here, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Again, when it comes right down to it, it's just out of curiosity, what happened? Because before COVID, we had people. After COVID, where'd they all go? I'm just curious because we can't find anyone to do anything in the trades. We can't find anything to advance the cause, and it becomes problematic from our standpoint. So if anyone has any insight as to where the frig all these people are, please tell us, because you know what, we have beautiful jobs, long-lasting careers in construction that we'd like to offer them, but we can't do so if they're not around. So with that being said, in Ontario, that's the focus that we're going to have right now. We've got a lot of infrastructure projects going on. We've got things what you look at on the housing side, but housing itself, you need to make sure that you have the infrastructure in order to service those houses. So if you don't have the roads, the sewer and water mains and whatnot, the bridges, in order to get to those houses, then it makes it almost impossible for us to build those houses. So we've got a huge push for housing, but we still have to look at the infrastructure side of things. Speaking of which, we've got a huge push for transit. And so that becomes a priority for a lot of the governments and whatnot. And again, being over in Europe, they've got bullet trains that you can get from one place to another in hours as opposed to half a day. So, they're traveling at 300-400 kilometers an hour. And we need things like that because we're an incredibly large country. And if we want to do work anywhere, you need to be able to get people around. And then again, that ties back into the housing. If you've got people who, we want affordable housing, but you can't get everyone in downtown Toronto. So if you've got them in an area, but it has the link to transit, now all of a sudden you have access to people. So these are all things that we have to look at. And we also have a push on expansion of highways and whatnot. And so all of these open up corridors. They open up accessibility. It's wonderful to have, but the biggest problem is finding the people to do that. And so what we're going to talk about, we have our panelists here today, or at least we have two of the three panelists here today. One of them is not here, but I'm sure that when he does show up, he'll have commentary to give. Anyway, I'm not going to go through the bios. The bios of our panelists are located in your package if you guys would like to go through it. I will tell you the overall is that they look at what we currently have as potential, as opportunity, as opposed to it being a drag on the system and not being able to advance the cause. They've turned it out and say, listen, this is a potential to have new entrants into construction, both from new graduates and students and whatnot, but also for newcomers to Canada. So all of this to me is beneficial. I look at it as potential. So we've got with us Bart Kanters, who is the president for Concrete Ontario. Richard Lyall will be here, I swear. And he, of course, represents RESCON. He's the president for them. And we have Mike Sherrard, who, Mike has a law practice. He is a lawyer. He's well known throughout the industry. But here today, he's here in the capacity of chair for Skilled Trades Ontario. So a round of applause for our two panelists out of the three.
It's the first time that concrete wasn't late. Let me just be clear on that. And I don't want to hear anything about concrete supply over the last 2 years. This is labor discussions.
Okay, so clearly you can heckle Bart.
Yep, I'm
It's
up
not a
for
problem. It's welcomed, actually. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask the panelists a series of questions and really create a discussion and whatnot. I'm also looking, again, if you have any timely comments or you want to add to it, we're happy to interact, but we only have 45 minutes. So what we're going to try and do is get through the session and possibly have space at the end for questions, if that's allowable. And then I'll give you an overview of what's happening in the afternoon. So without further ado, I'm going to start with the first question that I've already issued out to the panelists, and I want them to, again, they've been pondering this and really discussing it at length. So what are some of the workforce development strategies and or programs that your sector has implemented to attract new entrants into construction? Now, I was going to start with the housing side of things, but since Richard isn't here, I'm going to defer. I'm going to ask Mr. Mike Sherrard if he'd like to impart some knowledge upon our group today.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, okay. So Mike is refusing to speak over here. So.
Yeah. Doesn't happen often, so take it and run. Richard is stuck on the DVP appropriately, so he'll be here at some point. He'll join us. Background-wise, as John said, I'm here with a different hat on today than I wear on a number of my days. I'm proud to be the chair of Skilled Trades Ontario, and there's an incredibly active, energetic group in that team right now. All of you will have seen a skilled trades panel that got set up back in 2020 by the current provincial government. And the issue was to try to listen to rooms like this to say, what do we do next? How are we going to answer you, industry? How are we going to better industry with respect to where have all those people gone and how do we make sure they come to construction? And so when you look at skilled trades panel issues a paper to the government back in 2020. The government enacts legislation called BOSTA that creates the new Crown agency called Skilled Trades Ontario. Skilled Trades Ontario starts January 2022. So we're, 18 months in, depending upon where your math is. We are still pretty new. We're in the midst of standing up an organization that has a number of objectives. There'll be a strategic plan that will get published this fall, but I want to give you some highlights that you would expect. The government says, figure out how to make it easier for an individual to access the pathway to get into an apprenticeship. What can we do to accomplish that? That's number one. If you look, and you heard a number of speakers I heard earlier today talk about digital, you'll now know that there's a digital portal run by Skilled Trades Ontario that is trying to make it easier for an apprentice and an employer to get together and have a registered training agreement and move on to the process. That's a starting point. And many people on the panel complained to us that if a parent was sitting beside a kid looking at a laptop trying to figure out whether to go to university or to go to college, or maybe they actually have a conversation about a trade, 5 years ago they'd look at that computer and they couldn't figure out how to find the door, let alone how to find us in this room, right? I'm overstating it a little bit, but that's the kind of feedback we got. We got people talking to us here in Toronto who could stumble onto a construction site, or somebody in Thunder Bay who doesn't have the same amount of cranes that are up in our air today. And so we also were told, don't just think Toronto, make this work for the province. And then recently what we got told was, wait a minute, it's not just the province. Find a way to let people get back and forth across the provincial borders, the US border, the Mexican border. And so what you're going to see in skilled trades as one example is a foreign credentialing effort to see, is there a way that we can make it easier, not drop the standards, but make it easier, a clearer pathway to recognize foreign credentials. I saw 2 doctors, and remember, doctors aren't under my purview at all, but 2 foreign trained doctors last night after a dinner who said, Ontario's just done something. I don't have to write board exams because they've actually looked at my credentials and I can come in and practice. And so that foreign recognition is one part. Back to domestic for a moment. Find a way to make access easier for people, clearer pathways. Last fall, we had the most amount of people show up at career fairs across the colleges in this province in history. Thousands of parents came to those career fairs and looked at not just simply, we know there's 144 recognized trades right now. We know there are 23 or so compulsory trades. They actually got them talking about where might my kid fit. And I listened to people this morning. I was really pleased to hear that stat this morning from one of the earlier speakers where they said the average income of a skilled tradesperson compared to somebody who's got an undergraduate degree. And some of that is trying to convince people out of the gate, not after they've stumbled their way through college and then figured out, well, college wasn't for me, I want to move over to the apprenticeship, right? Can we get them to go from the average age of 28 on the entry and drop it down lower and get people making first career choices into the trades? Some of it you did really well. There is no sector in the economy anywhere in Ontario that can look in the mirror and not clap anymore, because in COVID, you were the #1 sector of staying open. You worked together, all sides worked together, and construction sites stayed open. The ministry, Monty as an example, was very helpful, but this is the sector he points at when he says, you are the example of success. I segue to that because when we talk to parents, they want to know their kids are going to come work in a health and safety-oriented culture. And that starts in a room like this. Starts with leaders like Jeff, right? They're leading health and safety cultures that we might not have been able to say the same thing 20 years back. Today, we can say construction is a safe place to work. Next steps for skilled trades, as an example, can we make sure that culture is also welcoming to the underrepresented? So I'll stop there and welcome Richard.
Hey, Mike, how you doing? Is this thing on?
It is.
Okay.
So I think just because he's a laggard and stuff like that, round of applause for Mr. Richard Lyall. It's not easy fighting your way down the DVP and Richard, again, thank you for participating, even though he's got like demands on him like crazy. Because again, Richard represents most of the housing sector in Ontario, and getting things done is problematic. It's not as easy as it sounds. When they say we need so many homes built, it's, again, back to the initial question, how do we find the people? Where do they come from? So, Richard, we started with a conversation piece. First question was, what are some of the workforce development strategies and our programs that your sector has implemented to attract new entrants to construction? I wanted to start with you. I had to jump to Mike just because you're in absentia. But again, on the housing side, what have you guys done to really pull it in?
Well, we've been at this for a long time. As you know, Giovanni, it goes way back, and you know, one of the big barriers we're dealing with is systemic. You know, I remember being in Europe a few years ago, and a leading representative of Canada came to me and said, the Germans are confused. And I said, why? He said, well, they say these contingents from Canada keep coming over year after year to find out about how they do it right in terms of skilled trades development and so on and so forth. And we brief them, we tour them and everything, and they leave. And then the next year, the same organization sent another contingent over, and this is like Groundhog Day, over and over again. And they said, why are they doing this? I said, you know, Germany's a nice place to visit. You know, we're having real difficulty, and I think I say, you know, I like to say that Canada is so rich that we can afford bad government, because we are the richest country in the world if we really think about it. But we're not executing properly, and we're not dealing with technocratic problems properly. We have a crisis, amongst other things, not just in housing, but more broadly speaking, in public administration. So there are things systemically that we still need to do. There have been some changes recently. We've been advocating for improvements, but there are things that we still need to do to fix our education system and really introduce at an early age and through public school and high school opportunities in skilled trades to young people, and do it properly. Frank Stronach wrote a piece in the National Post, I think, recently, which really did say it all, and he was saying we need to go to these European models, because 8 of the top 10 countries in the world that are dealing with this properly are European countries. I mean, there's no mysteries here, but there is inertia. You know, it's and then when you look at our school system, we should be, for example, young people should be assessed early on as to what their learning style is, because our system's really, it's sort of one way of really approaching it. But if you have, like, for example, with skilled tradespeople, and it applies to both men and women, girls and boys. They can be visual learners, right? It's a different ball game. And, you know, I had the benefit of going through a school system where they did that and they did it properly. And it was actually in what we would call the third world, although their education system was pretty good. We need to do that kind of thing here. And then we've got these supercomputers everyone's walking around with. There should be guidance apps that are available for nudging kids and highlighting certain things and saying, hey, did you know this was coming to town? And because you're really interested in this stuff. We have the capacity to do these things, but we're not doing it properly. The more recent change by the government to allow for apprenticeship starting in grade 11 and so on, that makes sense. We really do need to get into the public schools systemically and introduce kids in grades 5, 6, 7, and 8 as to skilled trades opportunities and what it is and what it's about. And there are ways of doing that. We're not doing that. And of course, that's the age when, you know, kids are making their decisions about what they want to do with their lives. And so what's happening right now is that we have a lot of kids that are getting pushed through high school. They're getting graduated, right? That was the big trick by a recent government, was to, we'll improve our numbers. And of course, what they did was they just stopped failing people. So that's an easy thing to do. But, you know, we've got, you know, if you look at the average age of an apprentice, I think Mike is still around 28, 29 years old. If you compare that to Germany that I mentioned early on, it's 19. You know, that's a problem. And what that says, and I've seen it, I've got 4 kids between the age of 16 and 24, so I'm quite familiar with the school system. You know, you got a ton of kids coming out of school and they're lost, right? Because they didn't get what they needed. We've done a good job prepping them for colleges and universities. Systemically, we fund that, subsidize it to a large degree, but in the skilled trades, we're not doing that. And, you know, one of the answers there, of course, is to start treating employers like educators, because that's where they were. Because, of course, as all of you know, where you learn in the skilled trades is on the job. You can do certain things in a classroom, but on the job is where you learn. And so systemically, we've got these issues. We've been involved with, on many levels. We've got an Ontario Skilled Trades Alliance. We've got an Ontario Construction Careers Institute. I've been sponsoring women in construction for over 20 years, maybe closer to 30 different programs and things like that. But you can do all these Band-Aid things. We've got a ton of programs out there right now where different groups are getting money and training kids and so on. But, you know, again, the pre-apprenticeship programs aren't there. The screening's not there to assess. You get kids into a program and there's nothing at the end of it, right? It's a churn and you get these churn and burn programs, and it's really terrible because we're still dodging the bullet. It's kind of like on housing. We're dodging a lot of issues. You know, we celebrate mediocrity. We're announcing things on housing that shouldn't have been problems in the first place, unlike other jurisdictions. And you have the same thing in education with skilled trades. We've got similar problems in public transit. You know, we seem incapable of building a functioning LRT in Ontario. I don't know why, but you know, problems like that. But skilled trades is vital. It is fixable, but we've got to deal with it systemically and stop the churn and burn.
So Richard wasn't present in the room when I said that they're looking at opportunities and good things, and he just brought the room down a little bit by saying all the problems that exist. But again, this is no. But I think when you look at it, you've got to be realistic about this stuff. It is not all rose-colored glasses and whatnot. You have to look at the problems in order to define it so that you can solve it. Yeah. And so this is one of the reasons why the panelists are coming up and explaining this stuff to you, because we want to make sure that we address it head on, because sticking your head in the sand doesn't fix anything. It doesn't advance the cause. So I'm going to, just because Bart's been very patient and Richard jumped the gun a little bit, but it's quite all right.
Sure.
Bart, what about you? What is the supplier side of things been doing in order to really advance this?
Yeah, and that's one of the big challenges for us. I'm the odd duck on this panel, if you haven't figured that out already. But whether it's concrete, steel, wood, drywall, whatever it is, the last couple of years have definitely shown us raw material supply chain is a critical issue. From a supplier standpoint, we're either manufacturing or processing materials 40 to 100 kilometers away from the site, and then we got to transport them in a timely manner to the job site. So really, I think over the last few years, all the supplier associations have realized we need to do more in working in partnership with the various construction associations and the unions to promote the industry. And that's our biggest, that's the area where we've fallen down the most, and we need to put the most effort going forward, is how do we get in front of the young people? How do we get them interested in the great and innovative and exciting jobs and the satisfaction that you get from being involved in a project? And yes, my son's 21. He works 60 hours a week. He just graduated from Conestoga College, heavy equipment operator, and he is excited about his future. And that we need to get that passion out to more people. So from a supplier standpoint, we need to support the efforts of the government. We need to support the efforts of the other construction associations, because we feed into that process, and we can definitely do more. I'll leave it at that.
So Bart just mentioned heavy equipment operator, and it segues really well into the next question I want to ask them. Just by a show of hands, how many here know the difference between a compulsory trade and a voluntary trade? Okay, I got 4. Holy Jesus. Okay, anyway. So based on this, you've heard of electricians, plumbers, carpenters? Right. Those are compulsory trades. Okay, you haven't heard of concrete drivers, of sewer and water main, if you're going to be a pipe layer, things like that. Those are voluntary trades. There's a lot of them. There's a lot more of them than the compulsory side of things. So the question I have is, due to the very nature of this exposure on the compulsory side, what steps are being taken to increase apprenticeship overall, but especially for those trades that may not be mainstream? And I'm going to divert the first question, that question specifically, to Michael.
So maybe we get started with, we go back to Richard's comment about what we're seeing the government do on the education side. The Youth Apprenticeship Panel came out with a number of recommendations, and I think the government has embraced at least 90% of them, if not more. One of which was, let's get in the schools quicker. Let's get back to, how many people in this room, show your age, actually had shops when they were in high school? Right? That made a difference. So having the Ministry of Education start to talk about, have tech credits back in schools, have a young person after grade 10, so in grade 11, actually start to be able to look at a pathway. Really important, Richard's comment is, all of those technologies out there, I think of one company off the top of my head, and there's a bunch of them, called Fit First, where a young person can take a look at a whole bunch of these opportunities and try to figure out where they might fit. So that if they thought they wanted to be an electrician and they get registered and they start and they're like 30 days on the job and they're like, oh my God, this isn't for me. Can we find ways to take that young person and make sure they are streamed over to where they fit better? Right? Somebody said to me, the Ministry of Education says we graduate approximately 140,000 kids every year in Ontario. And Mike, if you think you're going to graduate 160, it's not going to happen. It might happen with that population increase that the individual earlier talked about in Ontario, but you should think of, we got 140,000 kids. How many of those can you have their minds turned toward construction? We at Skilled Trades, as an example, if you've not heard, and to John's point, right, 4 hands went up. If you jumped on Skilled Trades Ontario's website, you'll quickly see the list of the 144 skilled trades, 23 of which are compulsory. Compulsory, the difference simply between compulsory and voluntary, at least one simple difference is there are scopes of practice. And if in the scope of practice for an electrician, it has A, B, C, D, that means only somebody who's got an apprenticeship ticket or is certified as a journey person can do that work. And I'm really simplifying for a moment. It's much more complex when we get into the scopes. One of the things that we've now done, and you'll see it advertised, is we have industry advisory committees where we're looking for people like you in industry to come in and sit on a committee to make sure that when we update the curriculum and we update the standards, we're getting industry's voice. One of the things we'll talk about this morning at some point is, and I know this doesn't fit construction, but if you were an automotive tech 10 years ago and you're an automotive tech today, boys, I hope you got some electrical training, right? Not necessarily what you looked at back then. I think of the same thing. If I'm on a residential construction site, I'm a mason. Am I now able to work with the eaves product? If I was a framer and I was doing stick-built homes, how am I at installing panels that are manufactured in a facility? Just those kind of examples is why we need people like yourselves to join these industry advisory committees so that when we're updating the standards, how we're going to train these folks, they actually get current standards as opposed to standards that are 5 years old, let alone where we're going to be in 5 years.
So Bart, I'm assuming that you have no problems finding drivers for concrete trucks because you guys are amazing, you pay well, and everyone knows what a lucrative career that may be, correct?
No. So 5 years ago, we got into, as an association, doing both billboards and electronic advertising of ready-mix drivers. And picking on the concrete industry, just because I know that a little better, we've got 4,000 drivers in the province that we have currently a vacancy for 500. So we produce 12 million cubic meters of concrete. We have to make 1.4 to 2 million deliveries per year just to supply the project, and finding people is the challenge. We're 60%, 70% unionized. So again, it's not a compulsory trade at all. But again, working with the various unions that our members utilize when it comes to trying to support their marketing efforts, those are things that we need to do more of. But at the association level, we're highlighting the jobs that our industry has just to try and get in front of more people and draw more people in.
Yeah, that's a tactic that a lot of people are doing, just posting and hoping for the best. But I don't think that's really something that will work. You need to generate a supply of individuals into it. Build Force Canada comes out with surveys. They come out with reports and forecasts, and the current one from 2023 to 2032 shows a deficit in skilled trades of 200,000 individuals. And so, again, this is something that capacity-wise we really need to address. Richard, how are you dealing with this on the housing side?
Well, we've got various programs. And remember, in housing is a heavily subcontracted industry. So when you talk about, I manage Builders Council. Builders don't actually employ most of the people that are involved in building buildings. We have direct employees. We've got some service people, some handy people, some labor, general labor. But basically, when you're talking about building a high-rise or a low-rise building, you're into 25, 30 different trades, different subcontractor groups, which all have their own associations. We have a council of those associations, so they try to deal with their particular issues. Some are better than others. There are some peculiar barriers within some of those groups, for example, depending on who the workforce is and who they'll accept into that group. So there are some issues like that. But, really the reason why I went off initially on the systemic issues is that we've got lots of programs, there's lots of efforts, we've got people going into high schools. We did all those videos, and Giovanni was part of that, where we did a whole range of videos of young people, half women, half men, 25 different trades, talking about how much they like what they're doing. And they're great videos because we felt that we needed something that was short and, you put it on YouTube or whatever that young people could watch, and a young lady could see, a young lady operating a D9 bulldozer and go, shit, I could do that too. Why not, right? But so things like that. But ultimately, we have a serious systemic problem. And because the numbers are huge. They estimated, I think the Board of Trade was costing Ontario $8-point-something billion a year, the shortage of skilled trades. We're spending an enormous amount of money subsidizing college and university education. So I'm not saying that's wrong, but we do know that 50% of the young people graduating from universities then go to college. And those are the ones that graduate, go to college to actually learn some skills so they can be something other than maybe a barista. Nothing wrong with that. I like a good coffee, but we've got to do a better job than that. We've got a misallocation of resources. And then with respect to pathways for young people, it should be no less, it should be as easy in a high school to say, you go into a counseling office and say, I want to go to university, what do I have to do? And then what is it you want to study? And then it's bang, 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 bang. We know this. Most of you know this. Same thing with colleges, whatever. You get the skilled trades, the wall is blank. We call that the third wall, by the way. And in most counseling offices, it does not exist. That's not the fault of the counselors. 95% of high school counselors don't know anything really about the skilled trades, or very, very little. And of course, as we know in high schools, the average amount of time a kid gets a year in career counseling is about 30 minutes, right? And so that has to change. And we also know that, well, there's a whole other story about counseling. I won't go there, but we have to change that, because a young person should get the right exposure to the opportunities. The educator should know what their learning styles are like, how they learn, right? And that helps with, as Bart said, in terms of kind of channeling kids, or exposing them to certain pathways and stuff like that. And then they need to have the technological aid that's available. I mean, we've got the technology to do this stuff, and then they can get help through it. And but the pathway has to be cleared. So if somebody says, what kid doesn't want to drive something, right? I got a daughter, my youngest just turned 16, and she's on me like a panther. I got to get my license, I want a car, and I want it today, right? And I get that. They want that. Concrete truck, I mean, those are cool machines to drive. Pays very, very well. So why do we have a shortage of that? I know, there's a raft of young people that are unemployed or can't get jobs or whatever, and meanwhile we've got these shortages in certain key areas, and that's a failure that's a pathway failure. The pathways aren't clear, they're not there. That doesn't mean to say that every Canadian, there are certain occupations in Canada where, foreign agricultural workers, guest workers that we have. There are certain jobs that Canadians probably aren't going to do, right? But there are many that they could be doing, but we're just not connecting the dots, and we have to do a better job of that. So having said, we've got lots of nice little programs here and there, and so on and so forth, things that I love. There's one at Durham College that we sponsor I'm the lead sponsor every year at Durham College. It's for young girls who, and it's just girls. Keep the boys out, separate the two, because what they do is bring truckloads of girls in. Most of the speakers, all the speakers are girls, except for me sometimes. They put up with me. But what they do is they run the girls through the various tech shops, and so they can actually have a sort of a tactile experience and see. If you had the boys there, the girls would be at the back of the room on their phones. The boys would be playing with all the stuff. You don't want that. But things like that, just clever little programs like that in terms of, it should be in every college. Every high school, there's a great program that we've been sponsoring for 20 years. It's called the STEP program, the Skills Trades Exploration Program. My favorite day every year is they have the kids that go through this program. It doubled after 10 years. This is 1 out of 100 high schools in Toronto. They doubled the program, and it was a fight to get it doubled to 72 kids a year. And they have a session every year where they have 8 of the graduates each year talk. And they're up there on a panel, right? And we have we've got a bunch of builders and myself, and we sponsor it and whatever. And you hear these kids talk. I cry every year. I literally cry, because I hear these stories, and these kids can speak, because when they're motivated and they're excited about something, they're turned on by stuff, they can speak. They don't need notes. They're great speakers. And they talk about how they were lost in the system, and then usually, per chance, although that's changing now, it's getting a little bit more known, they find this program and it saves their lives. Just one young lady that went through it, she's well off onto a brilliant career now. She could have gone construction management. I think she's now a certified electrician, yada, yada, yada. She was doing the victory lap, the 5th year of high school, solid 55 average. Most of her time was spent doing, you can imagine what, nothing of any particular use, completely lost in the system. Nice family. It wasn't that situation. And then she found this program, she got into it, she killed it. She was placed with Mattamy Homes, and her mark from Mattamy Homes. Mattamy Homes, they're they're not a pushover. They gave her 100. That's how good she was. She worked in customer service. She got on out with some of the trades and things like this. But that's one high school out of 100 in Toronto. The program's doubled. We're trying to see if we can get that expanded. But what it does is it takes young people that are lost in the system, then they run them out to, our builders, and some of our trades that are, work with us on this. We put them out with the electricians for a week, with the plumbers for a week, with the sheet metal for a week, and so on. They get exposure to this, and then they have to do a project, and they have to cost the project. They have to do the estimating, and the planning, the scheduling, and all this stuff, and then they get a placement with a company, and they're all success stories. I mean, there's literally, but they're screened in the beginning, and there's limited, like there's a lot of kids want to get into the program, they can't. And but that's the kind of stuff that we have to do. Local high schools have to do that. And the connection between local high schools and local industry isn't there. Where are the kids from the local high school going to the kick-ass bakery that's in the neighborhood? We've got a couple where I live that are just wonderful operations, and but kids should be from the skilled trades, should be spending some time in that bakery and seeing, and maybe getting a part-time job there, maybe working for free for a little bit in the beginning just to get exposure, they get their orientation, and then they start to get paid, they get exposure to that, or at least they can just see it and see what it's like. And there's so many other skilled trades that can be done too. But I can't stress enough that we can have all these programs we want, but if we're not successful, we've got to be, and we can be, I don't mean to put a downer on this, but we have to deal with the systemic barriers that are deeply rooted. We've got scopes of practice that are 50 years old. We're not training people for the jobs. Like we've got a complete area of work, we call it concrete and drain. It's a separate sector of the industry. We've got another one called low-rise forming, and it's an industry. They got their own association and everything else like that. They specialize in building basements for new houses. That's it, right? And then we have a whole bunch of others. They're not certified trades. They're, this kind of thing. So we need to train, we need to be, have the ability to train people for the work that's going to be done. And, and I'm going to say this is tech related here. In 10 to 20 years, sometime within that time period, the number one job on a job site is going to be the tech running the drones and the robots and keeping them working and cycling them in and out and stuff like that. That's going to be the number one construction job. And so what are we doing about that? Who's looking forward to that? Where do we, how are we going to deal with these things? But that is just a fact. I mean, we already, when I saw that they figured out the gyroscopics on the robots, I thought, okay, here, we're going to get going now, because that was the main problem. They kept falling off. Not a good thing, right? But now they can do backflips off a brick wall. But that is coming, and a lot of the unsafe work. Think about tunnel work. Think about asphalt raking, road building. Those jobs they're going to go to robots, for sure. But who's going to be looking after them, and who's going to, that whole area there, and building them, right? So yeah.
Because one of the larger questions I think we need to ask is, obviously in construction we have there's an issue with stigma. There's an issue with construction being the ugly stepchild. And if you haven't gone to university or college, then you're going to have to go to construction. Or if you're not good enough to go there, then you have to go to construction.
I jump in on that one?
In just a second.
Okay.
I told you he'd occupy the entire freaking thing, but anyway. The thing with the STEP program that Richard talked about, OGCA is also involved in STEP to ICI construction, which is fantastic. And a lot of times where, you've got these students who, for a number of years up until grade 11, all they're told is that they're stupid. And it's only when they actually get onto a construction site that they're told, wow, you really know your shit. We really want you to work here. That's amazing. And that's the first time they're giving words of encouragement. So I hate to say it, but the school system isn't doing anything to advance construction. And to Richard's point, we do a really poor job of it ourselves in promoting all the technological advancements that we do in construction. The problem is that no one knows about it because we don't actually pat ourselves on the back on a regular basis. And that's why being in front of audiences like you really allow us a conduit to communicate how amazing careers in construction can be and how technologically advanced they're becoming. When you've got foremen that used to, spend hours and hours of reams of paperwork, and now it's a tablet. And as soon as the truck comes, they scan a barcode or they hit enter, and it's broadcast throughout the entire company. And accounting receives it, and they start processing, and inventory control receives it, and the next PO is issued, and the next truck is issued. It's all done with the tap of a button now. It's amazing how integrated we are to technology, and we've got vendors outside who talk about construction management programs and everything. And so the utilization is high in construction. We just don't do a really good job of talking about it. So I think the next question I want to hit before Richard takes over, but
No.
what do you see as the largest impediment to more people entering into a career in construction? Is it that our industry is lagging in technologies, or are there other factors? And I'm going to actually go to Bart first before I get to Richard, because
I'll hog it.
he sucks all the air out of the room. So Bart, please.
I will.
Again, I think we're back to the critical issue of trying to get more awareness. And I know at the high school level, trying to drive that change is probably one of the critical things. When we did a survey of our own members within the concrete industry, I didn't know if it was a factor of nepotism, but when 30% of the people that we're hiring in the concrete industry are the sons and daughters of people that are already there, why is that? It's not because they're handing jobs off to family members. It's because they see it at home, they hear about it, they see the passion, and that's what pulls them in. So quite frankly, in the concrete industry, it's family and friends of the workers that we currently have. That's where we go. There's not enough at the school level, and we need to be more proactive in helping out at that level. I'll hand it off now.
I'm gonna have to mic again, because again, if we go to Richard, then we only have 15 minutes.
Story of my life.
I'd say three things to think about. Skilled Trades Ontario right now is working on PD days for counselors to try to address exactly the issue that Richard's talking about, to raise their awareness that here's a professional pathway that should compete all across the way, whether it's a college, a university, or a trade. They're all equal, and we're trying to work on the counselors to bring them around. We can bring the counselors around. The next thing I think we need to do is celebrate. Celebrate every success we can find, and I'll give you quick examples. I'm sitting on a dock with my two daughters, and Nick comes over in his boat. Okay, my daughters are 24. Nick comes over in his boat, and I'm talking a dinghy. And I look over and I'm like, Nick? My daughters go, oh yeah, he's an electrician. He's already bought his first home. My daughters have school debt. Or I have school debt, maybe. And then the OGCA, I was lucky enough to attend one of Giovanni's events where he celebrated women in construction. And it was everyone from somebody who started as an electrician or a plumber or a trade and moved up, and now they were executives leading construction companies. And a lot of educators will say, if the person can see themselves in that person who's successful, we've got a better shot at them walking through that door. So that's really important. And then I'm going to finish. I said 3, I'm going to 4. My 4th is everybody look left and everybody look right, and decide whether when you leave here, you can employ one more apprentice. Yeah. Is there not a reason we can't put one more apprentice? And my commitment on my team, right? My chief of staff is here. Brian's in the room somewhere. He's got a bunch of cards. If we can deliver on making the pathways easier to get into, deliver for us, take one more apprentice. I didn't say take 10, take one more apprentice. I'll stop there.
It's Mike is at where the rubber hits the road is the placement opportunities for apprenticeships. And we've got to start, again, treating employers like educators. They are educators because that's where the students are learning. And we know what the value is of the end game there. We know what it's costing us right now to fail systemically on getting this set up right. So there's a real thing. Now, the one thing I was reacting to is, for as long as I can remember, I've heard about, well, the parents don't want their kids going into it, and there's a stigma and whatever else like that. I think the stigma thing was real. I think that's pretty much gone now. And the thing with the parents, I've always said that was complete bullshit. That was used systemically as an excuse not to change the system. Because I said, okay, talk to me about the parents. What are we talking about? How many parents don't want their kids going into skilled trades? 50, 60, 70, 80%? Yeah, okay, whatever, you know. So what? We don't need 50, 60, 70, 80%. We just need 10 to 15% of the annual graduating classes to meet our needs. So this argument is bullshit. What we're not doing is we're not reaching the kids that we should be reaching, that are lost in the system, and then they get into trouble and they whatever, and then they go off, and then we end up with a 28-year-old apprentice down the road for the ones that finally come around and say, you know, hey, I want to do this. And so I've always had a real problem with that. And then I was going to leave you with a story. Like I got very close to this. Long story there. It's a learning challenge with one of my daughters. I've got 3 beautiful daughters. I've got a son, and he's great. And one of my daughters, I mean, they all look like runway models, not because of me, but the one was a complete visual learner. So the problem, she was bailing out of school, so had to go off separately, get all these tests done. Luckily enough, I can afford to do that. We can afford to do that, and found this out. That's how she learned. So what's she doing now? She's in landscaping. She's in design. She's totally visual. You give her a list of things to do, forget it. You know, for various reasons. If it's a list of chores that she has to do, that's definitely forgotten. But you give her a list, not going to happen. She sees it visually. She remembers it. She's right on. She is incredibly talented in making anything. And but you wouldn't have known that. You would have, you know, typically in our society we would have said, well, she, you know, should be doing this over here. That's not her thing. But no, she learns, and more boys than girls are visual learners. But this is where these aptitudes. The school didn't have a clue about, you know, what the problem was and whatever else like that. So we had to find out separately. So, you know, it's the systemic changes. We can do it. I don't have any doubt about that. I think we're on the right track. Mike with STO, fantastic. Employers like Bart with their programs are very aware. They know their numbers. They know what they need. We know the numbers now. We didn't at one point in time. It was kind of funny. I mean, I was at the beginning when we set up Bill Force years ago, because I said nobody knows what our needs are because the education system's not paying attention to it. They know the college needs, they know the, you know, all this other stuff, but this area we don't. So we've made tremendous progress. It's very positive. It's very exciting. The really exciting thing for young people is that you have these brilliant careers ahead of them. And just one last quick story. We were looking at offsite modular construction, and we were over in Germany and whatever else like that, going to a factory there. We met Gerhard and Hans, you know, the 2 guys that are running it. One's the chief engineer, one's the business model guy. You look at their resumes. What's the first thing? This is a wood, mass timber, cross-laminated timber. You look at their resume. What's the first thing What's the first thing they got? They got their CAQ in carpentry. They became a certified carpenter in Germany first. Then they went on, because they were ambitious, they went and got engineering degrees, and then they both had MBAs, but in that order, right? But they knew wood. They knew everything about that factory. They knew how to make stuff, right? And we're not doing that well either here or over. But that's why they're an advanced manufacturing economy in the world, right? Sorry, buddy.
So, not to worry, I'm used to it. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit each panelist. I'm going to ask them for their closing remarks when it comes down. I'm going to give them 1 minute so you guys can time Richard, in all honesty, and then like ring a bell or something. And the question I want to ask them in the last minute is, how do you see technology and innovation assisting the construction industry and attracting people to construction in order to address the labor shortages that we have in Ontario? Let's start with Bart.
You mentioned before the adoption of technology, so tablets. We've got 4,000 ready-mix trucks, about 1,500 now, each have a 10-inch by 10-inch tablet. Not just, I won't bring it up from electronic ticketing and the processing side, but you add into that safety features, like the first person on the job site does the safety evaluation. That evaluation automatically gets kicked over to every subsequent driver that's coming to the job site. There may not be a safety issue in the area that they're working, but there's a pit adjacent to where we're placing concrete. That kind of information could be handed off. In the concrete industry, you're not just a driver, you're also a secondary batcher. So now we've got sensors that do drum rotations. It measures the hydraulic pressure. It tells you what the slump of the concrete is, so you're not going to have issues with the contractor or the subcontractors on the job site. So it's trying to automate the safety processes and automate the technical processes to make it easier for the driver. So you're driving a $400,000 ready-mix truck. What can we do to make the job easier? You got to have the desire to drive, but you also have to have the desire to build and interact with the contractor on the job site. I'll stop there.
Michael?
I'll stick to Skilled Trades Ontario for a moment to dodge your question a little bit. If you sign an RTA, one of the challenges has been it's one thing to sign it and have that apprentice show up on the site. It's another thing to make sure they get through all their hours, get through their schooling components, and actually pass their exam. So when we think about that, what can we do to help the employer, and I mean it that way, the employer first and that person trying to go through so that they can actually see 6 months from now, because young people, to stereotype for a moment, might not be that organized vis-a-vis the list approach. Can you help them get through so that they're not going to school for the first time after they've been through 3 terms of their hours? That's number one. There's a pilot program in Ontario right now because our statistics, to jump forward for a moment, they've got all through their hours, they've got all their schooling done, and now they're about to sit an exam, and our exam pass rate is miserable. Right? It's under 50% in Ontario. It might be the worst in the country. I'm guessing that. So don't quote me on that, for God's sake. But there's a 40-site pilot going on right now to say, why do you have to go to a government building to write your exam? Couldn't I write my exam where I learned? Most teachers are saying if you write your exam where you learned, you've got a better chance of succeeding just from just a pure comfort level. So 40 pilots suggest to us early on that we're going to increase exam pass rates significantly by moving to not just pilot, but permanent stuff. So that's in the works. I leave you with simply come and talk to us about the barriers that remain, right? Pick up the phone. Don't turn the cheek. Pick up the phone and say, Skilled Trades Ontario, I'm still running into this barrier. This is why we're struggling with my apprentice getting through the system. Keep talking to us because we want to improve the system. We'd never sit in front of an audience like this and say, we've got it perfect, right? We need to keep getting your feedback, and then we have to deliver on having listened and done something. So, stop there.
With a minute and a half left, Richard.
So, it's bizarre that construction still to this day is treated like the employer of last resort. We still have many decision makers who have a view of construction of people running around beating things with hammers and, handling shovels. And while that work does happen and it is a part of construction, construction is a technology industry. It has been. A lot of good things have been, a lot of really interesting things have been happening in the adoption of technology and construction at the skilled trades level. Tools, lasers, think about things like that. I could tell you a whole bunch of different stories there. I won't. But that is just expanding where we are not, again, systemically executing. Canada, Ontario is the only jurisdiction in the G20 that does not have a BIM mandate, which is building information modeling. We could be using things like digital twins and digitization and all these other things a lot more. I was involved with a project that we funded through UFT Engineering where we're trying to figure out how to get as-built drawings updated every 24, 48 hours. So the question is, how can you fly a drone into a concrete structure and where it doesn't hit the wall and crash, right? Things like that. And once you can do that, then there's a whole bunch of things that rule out of that. But the message for young people, too, is that construction is even on, look at the equipment, concrete trucks, and like these are incredibly sophisticated pieces of equipment. There's a lot of technology involved there, but construction is technology, and that message has to get out. This is not some knuckle-dragging sector. And as I said to you before, where we're going, different ballgame. We're going to be, the era of drones and robots is here, and it's for the better because we'll be able to take some very dangerous work and, who watches the bomb squad go in now? What goes in first? It's the robot, right? There's a reason for that. Who do you send into a tunnel that's got toxic fumes in it or whatever else like that? If you can send a robot in, you're going to do that. We're doing more and more things like that. So construction is technology. Technology is construction.